So welcome to Upside, where we talk all things European venture, startups and investing, digging into the real stories behind the tech headlines. Today it's Mads and myself from SuperSeed, joined by Ben Prade, a partner at the growth investment firm GP Bullhound. Now, GP looks like they've got nearly $1 billion AUM, and by the looks of things, have invested in every cool tech household name under the sun.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.
This show is not investment advice, and the hosts of this episode may be invested in the funds and companies featured.
Ben, welcome. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, hey guys. Well, great to be part of it. I've been listening to the podcast for the last few weeks and I really love what you guys are doing.
You're the listener, and my mum.
So GP Bullhound, it may be a name that pops out to some of you in the kind of tech industry. So we've been around about 25 years. We're an interesting beast, actually, because we are probably more predominantly known as an advisory house. We've been doing M&A for tech founders across Europe and the US for the last, like, as I say, 25 years. Actually, it was just around the dot-com burst that we kind of got started, actually. That's allowed us to build a big office network. You know, we're 12 offices. We're in Asia now as well. But I guess what's maybe a little bit less known is that we're building an investment business alongside that for the last 10, 15 years as well. Really kind of using the best kind of knowledge and contacts and deal flow from the network to really invest in those companies. And a bit different to you guys, we're a little bit more of a growth stage investor, I would say. I know you guys like the early days.
It's what Europe needs, right? I mean, we need more GP Bullhounds. I think no one's going to argue with that. We need more growth beyond the pre and the seeds.
That's right, yeah. And again, I think our portfolios are probably a little bit more concentrated as well. So we're only investing in maybe 10 companies per fund, getting very hands-on with those companies. So we'll often find they'll have a great early stage VC like yourselves in there, but then we're taking that baton on to really help internationalize them, think about even bolt-on acquisitions, going to the US, which is such a core part of any European company strategy. Is really, if you're going to go global, you have to break the US, right? And we're a good partner for that with the 2 offices over there.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us.
No problem. And then myself, so I was kind of more traditional investment banker for many years, hedge funds, trading, all that kind of jazz. Made the jump about kind of 8-10 years ago into tech. I sit on the IC, so I get involved in the investments, but really my day job is fundraising, which has been an interesting process.
We're going to dig into that. We're going to dig into that because we want to share, because I think many of our listeners are founders, and I really want to dig into what goes on behind the scenes, which you're hopefully gonna share all the dirty secrets. So that'll be super cool. But Mads, listen, first up, how's your week been? You've been away. You've been fabulousing in the mountains. What's new with you?
I've had a great week in the mountains. There's just nothing quite like the Alps, and we had terrific weather this year. Lots of snow right before we came, and then a week of sunshine. But temperature's cold enough to keep the snow powdery. Really enjoyed that. In the meantime, we were able to do 2 term sheets this week, so got some investment done
just
as well.
While you were shushing down the slopes, just signing a term sheet on your mobile phone.
I just need to go away more. Is
I bet the family loves that when you're out there doing term sheets when you should be with the kids.
Yeah. I'm with 4 daughters.
What are lifts for?
Like, yeah.
What are lifts for, right?
There you go. No, if we can do a few deals going up the mountain, why not? What else has been on your mind? So you've had some other thoughts. Do share.
Something that happened tail end of last week was the Munich Security Conference, and I think we recorded last week on a Thursday, and it happened Friday, and we published Sunday. So there was kind of a little bit of a dead zone that we didn't quite get to catch on the pod, and it was really interesting that there was this talk from JD Vance that was kind of left many in Europe a bit shell shocked. And I actually going back over the talk and listening to it, I mean, it's easy to get swept away by the media narrative about how horrible he was to Europeans. And I think there's clearly, when you think about the kind of the U.S. policy right now. We're European focused, but what's happening in Washington is very relevant to us because it influences, kind of everything right now on a global basis. And I think there were some things he got wrong, and probably also some things he got right in the speech, J.D. Vance. And so, firstly, maybe some of the context. So, there are potential accords on the horizon with Russia, which is, you could say it's maybe not the ideal situation from a European perspective, that the U.S. sort of seems to have done a 180 in terms of who are really the allies and what are their objectives. And then there's also a potential trade accord with China. This is a little bit more speculative, but there is speculation that Trump really is trying to do a big trade deal with China that will sort of completely upend the global trade flows. And so on top of that, Trump has also said, look, we got to cut defense spending. We sort of got to try and go for global disarmament, which in many ways is a laudable goal. If you think about some of the things maybe that the speech got right, I think there is this talk about freedom of speech, and freedom of speech is important. It's kind of not to conduct or condone terror or subversion of the state, but to discuss and find insights. And I think there is an argument that maybe the pendulum in Europe has swung a little bit too much in the wrong direction, where we become a little bit too cautious about really letting people speak, even when we disagree with what they say. I think there's another element that was really interesting coming out of the talk, which is, okay, so let's say that the U.S., kind of new U.S. policy is no longer to be the sort of quote unquote global policeman, but to pull back from some of those duties they've taken over in the past. Well, we can either see that as a terrible loss in Europe, or we can see that as a bit of a wake-up call to take charge and be in charge of our own destiny. And if you think about Europe today, the European economy, even excluding the UK, but the EU economy is 10 times the size of the Russian economy. And so, add UK to that, it won't take a whole lot for us, I think, to match Russian level of military capability. And I think there is something about sort of saying, look, we're not expecting our, the daddy that's the US, kind of our parent, to come to our rescue. No, we've got to grow up, be in charge of our own destiny, and make sure we have the capabilities we need to defend our sovereignty, our security, the safety of our citizens. And I think if we take that mindset, maybe something good could come out of this. Maybe we could be a little bit more forward-looking, a little bit less sort of looking in the rearview mirror, and a little bit more about, well, what will it take for us to be, autonomous, not just from a defense perspective, but also technologically, and able to carry our own weight in the world. And so I hope that people will see it as a wake-up call and as an opportunity to step up, as opposed to sort of, I think what we sometimes do is to sort of just feel hard done by and sort of, slink away over into the corner and say, oh, aren't they terrible? So that was my perspective of that. There's a lot more we can go into around what does it mean for European defense, what's happening dig more into it, UK and AI, and we can unpack that as we go.
Yeah, we're definitely gonna go there later across multiple topics. Ben, what's been keeping you up this week? What's been on your mind?
Well, a little bit of that kind of stuff. I do agree with Mads. I think this is an opportunity for Europe. I wonder sometimes with these speeches that are made, how much strategy there is behind it and how much there's just looking for impact, looking for headlines. And we'll see if the US has a real strategy for Europe and some of its interactions on a global level, or whether it just changes week by week, tweet by tweet. That's the only thing that bothers me. But if it comes to a good point for Europe and we take our destiny back in our own hands, I think that's great. I thought there was some really interesting points you guys made a couple of weeks ago about the US almost kind of wanting Europe to be beholden to them from a defense point of view, to be able to kind of get this political power that it's had over the world. And it'll be interesting as the US pulls back, who will fill those voids. I think there's clearly an opportunity for China to get more involved. In fact, I saw this week, I think there's a new tender out by the Hong Kong government to invest in VC funds across Europe. And you would think, well, that's an interesting thing to do. Why are you doing that? And I think there's not, perhaps there's a void there to be filled by Chinese money in certain locations which will build goodwill. And in the long run, that's a shame for the US, right? Because I think it loses that soft power that it has across the world. And it does bring a lot of justice and a lot of good things. So we'll have to see how that develops over the long term. I think the US is a long-term loser on that front. But other than that, Europe, I think is good. I think we spent a lot of time this week or last few weeks building deal flow in Germany. There are some fantastic companies there. I think that engineering spirit that they had from the last generation that built so many great engineering companies and manufacturing companies is there in the new generation to build technology companies. We see that same determination. And, I think it's a great opportunity. It's a great time for Europe to, as you say, stand on its own 2 feet and prove what it can do.
Well, Trump is definitely doing that. The Trump administration is definitely making everybody globally much more concerned about their own defense, security, their own standing in the world. Is the JD Vance rhetoric and the Trump admin, is it changing your investment criteria? Is it changing the way that you view deals? Are you looking at more defense, for example?
Well, for us, I think clearly the amount of money coming into defense, you can't ignore. And we can get onto this when we talk about fundraising. If you're raising a fund and you're telling people you're going to invest in defense, you are more likely to raise a fund right now, which means more money
it's not
going
just AI,
into.
I think most people would assume that, if you put AI on your pitch deck or whatever, AI on your startup or VC pitch deck, you're going to fundraise. But we've got a new game in town, the defense game, right?
That's right, and these things come and go. Quantum's another one. But sure as hell, if you're going to say you're going to raise a fund in marketplaces, you're not going to raise that fund, right? Even if that might be the best strategy out there from an investor point of view. So for sure, these massive themes, that the link to geopolitics is having an impact on the ground or in what we're all investing in and what we're looking at.
I've not seen this. I mean, maybe I've had my head in the sand, but I've not seen at a government level so much potential impact for our industry as in VC startups, almost at the lowest end. Obviously we're a stage before you in the investment sphere, investing at pre-seed and seed rather than the growth piece. But I've never experienced in my career the macro really almost immediately affecting AI defense, almost coming full stack down the stream to create different strategies. I think it's an exciting time to be alive. But Ben, you've been out on the fundraising tip. You've been out speaking to LPs to invest in your latest fund, which I think you just closed 300 mil?
300 million, yeah. We did another 300 million fund. So
tell us a little bit about what your impression of the response from LPs, what they're looking at, how the industry, how the ecosystem is feeling from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess it's important to go back a few years to think about what's happened, I guess, over the last 10 years or so. There was obviously a great time for VC, kind of post 2012, all the way through to 2022. You had a whole food chain operating, early stage funds, growth stage funds, late stage funds, and importantly, an IPO market that was functioning. This was allowing companies to make good investments and then get their cash back out and send that cash back to LPs.
Well, this is one thing that we talk about quite a lot, which is founders especially, I don't think they fully appreciate that whole stack, that full recycling. If our investors aren't taking returns, they're not able to recycle in the next generation of VC funds and startups. So that is incredibly important. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's an incredibly important part of our ecosystem that basically stopped, right?
That's right. Yeah. So I think it stopped for a few reasons. Clearly, it got overheated. COVID came along. I mean, it poured, rocket fuel onto the whole system. People sat at home. Certain types of technology companies just went through the roof. We also had, zero interest rates at that time, free cash into the system. Everything got overblown. And then we saw, the big blow up in the markets. Once inflation went up, interest rates went up, the markets hit a full stop and came flying down. And then in our industry, private market valuations of our companies tend to mirror the listed market valuations quite quickly these days. It's not even that big a lag. So you had this horrible moment in 2022, 2023, where we were all reducing the valuations of the companies that we were holding in our funds. So all these funds that were looking super, super good on paper, suddenly were looking a lot more realistic in terms of valuations. That coincided with this big ramp up of people coming into the industry. So new funds being launched on the back of this, this great run that we'd had in the late 2010s. The amount of funds out there just grew massively. And of course, it was fine that the money was coming into the system from new investors who were getting sucked into VC, who potentially maybe shouldn't have been there. But there was so much news around that. Now, of course, you've got a situation where a lot of new funds raised their first fund, 2020, 21, 22, invested at the top of the market. And, now those valuations are looking pretty toppy. They don't have the track record. They're coming back to market now. And it's like, well, can you give me another $1 billion, please? But, the money from the last fund has done absolutely nothing. And it sure as hell isn't coming back to anyone in cash terms anytime soon. So as the IPO market has just died, it means that the cash isn't flooding back into the system. And we have this concept of DPI, which for people that don't know, that's kind of distributions to paid in capital. So that's the amount of money you're getting back from a fund compared to how much you've invested in it. And let's be honest, most funds are delivering almost zero DPI back. So a lot of money is stuck in the system. It's not coming back to LPs. A lot of LPs just don't need VC in their portfolio.
Yes.
It's not like
we're often an afterthought. I don't know if you found this. I mean, at our stage, it feels like we're so the our LPs tend to do publics. They'll have some property. They'll do their philanthropic stuff, and then VCs. It almost feels like the afterthought. It's like 1% to 2% of AUM. I don't know if that's possibly not the space you play in. I imagine.
No, it is. I mean, we have investors all the way from entrepreneurs all the way through to institutions. I think, what has happened also for the institutional investors, a lot of that cash was coming from the US. It was the biggest investor in VC, and some of that was coming into Europe. Now, since the revaluation in tech, the leading light in technology has been the AI boom in the US, the Magnificent Seven. And then off the back of that, the private companies in the AI space in the US have been doing very well also. So now that big pool of capital in the US is not really looking beyond the US borders, which has been another problem for Europe, is that US investors, it's very hard, let's be honest, for a European fund to go to the US and attract investment when they've got such a big technology ecosystem over there. And that has sucked some of the fuel out of European VC.
Where are most of your LPs? Are they global? Are they Europe? Has that affected you at all?
Well, actually, we do have investors from the US, but in our last fund, very little new investment from the US. So what we found is, we're kind of lucky because we've just raised a fund post the revaluation. So a lot of funds are still going out there now. Our fund, we had to kind of raise this fund in the new paradigm, if you like. And what we found is, you mentioned it, is government money. That was very interesting for us. So what has filled the gap from what used to be maybe US pension fund money is government money. And I think a lot of governments across the world have seen the potential for technology to allow them to have a domestic economic policy to create jobs, to attract people to their region. And the way they're accessing that is through VC funds. So, I think there's a good opportunity for European funds to work with foreign governments, both in Europe and across the world. I mean, we got a lot of investment from Southeast Asia. And these are great countries with, good sovereign wealth, but with a policy-driven element to what they're doing, And so going to these nations, we're a big organization. We can do M&A, we can do reports, we can do research, we can work with their local companies. So I think, to your point about government getting more involved, I think VCs these days, to attract funding, have to do more than just say, give me some money and I'll give you some money back in 4 years' time. They need to work very closely with the LPs in terms of knowledge sharing, ecosystem building, to gate that money, to bring that money in. And I think that's a key development that we'll see. Of course, it does throw up the questions of, does government money change the strategy of the underlying VCs? Is there an issue around those VCs maybe changing what they were doing before to attract government money? And we'll see how that plays out. Some governments will require the VC to put a certain amount of money back into their ecosystem, and that can start to influence the investor as to where they're putting that money. We've managed to avoid that so far and work more in terms of softer connections, in terms of building, opening offices or working within those ecosystems. But I think it's an important development for VC. So if you're a new VC right now going out to raise a fund, you need to think, I need to really focus on a particular sector, be very sector focused, whether it's AI or whether it's defense. I need to have some deep expertise in that particular sector, maybe people in my team from academia, etc. And I need to go out and show LPs how I can work with them to educate them around that sector. And that's how you're building a longer term LP base, I think, right now.
Quickly on the M&A IPO piece, is your sense that 25 is going to open up more of all? It feels like that anecdotally, but I think you're closer to the fire than we are. Are you sensing that that's happening?
We're sensing it's happening. It's not coming as quickly as everyone hoped, I have to admit. Even Klarna, for instance, we know we're investors in Klarna from a couple of our funds. It's a fantastic company. They've been talking about the IPO. It's maybe looking like April, May now that they may IPO. I think that'll be a huge bellwether for what happens next. But even they've taken their time. So whether 2025 is the big dawn or not, I suspect maybe 26, 27 really.
Okay. It feels like AI specifically has accelerated the recovery, has accelerated LPs being back in the black. It feels like we've got this accelerating force with kind of this slight liquidity push being then unevenly distributed because of geopolitical tensions. And I'm also hearing anecdotally a lot of Italian government money going into VC funds and being released with a very specific focus on Italian startups, and a little bit going on in Spain. So it just feels like this nationalist populist push, especially from the government level, is now creating a few more engines and fires in local economies, which I don't think is a bad thing, but I'd love to see how this all comes to pass. Now, Mads, have you got any, before we move on to the crystal balling and opportunities in European venture, have you got any reflections on what Ben has been saying, or any thoughts about our experience of the fundraising environment in Europe?
I think Ben charted the path perfectly. It's what we've all seen and lived through. You had a bubble in 2021, 22. The bubble burst and has been deflating. The recovery from that bubble has taken longer than people wanted or were hoping for. I think there has been a lot of focus on public markets. It's kind of, I think maybe for the first time, you've been able to play this new tech wave of AI through public markets, which many people have been doing. But that said, AI is clearly a subsector within the venture capital ecosystem and startups where things are happening, and a lot is happening, and valuations are relatively high, dollars are flowing, investments are being made, and capital is being raised. And so maybe the truth is we're just never going to go back. Things are never going to go back to the way they were. It's a constant evolution, and the markets will keep changing. And I think, the insight is if you're building good companies, you'll always be able to raise capital. There's always money for good businesses. And that's been the experience even in 2023, which was not a great year. So things are tougher, but it's not impossible. And I think when people work hard and build good companies, I think there's always a way.
Well, let's have a chat about the future and how Europe and LPs and VCs and startups and that connective tissue, how we think that's going to progress over the next 2, 5, 10 years. But first, just for a little bit of background context about the European ecosystem. So last year, Germany, France, and the UK, the VCs there invested around $25 billion. Across all of Europe, that was about $45 billion compared to the States, which was $200 billion. So still a fair track behind. Now, over the past decade, European VC has yielded a net IRR, so internal rate of return, of 20.8%, beating the US at 18.2%. So European funds have outperformed on an IRR basis. European VC has consistently outperformed public markets, delivering a net annual return of 23% over the last 10 years. And the share of global VC has gone up from 5% 20 years ago to 20% in 2023. So there's a lot to be positive about in the European ecosystem. But Ben, if you were crystal balling and looking to the future, and I love your optimism, because you've always struck me as this kind of super positive, optimistic guy in our industry. What do you see? Where are the opportunities? Where are you investing? Where are you playing? And how do you perceive the world?
Yeah, I think for us, we do invest across Europe. You mentioned Italy, you mentioned Spain. You know, Spain is a very interesting region for us. We do a lot of investment in Spain. We have a lot of investment into our fund from Spain, from the stakeholders in government all the way through. I think we are seeing academia being more present in technology than it was. Maybe that's one of the real benefits of the last few years. You know, I think if you look at the companies in the 2010s that were taking off, it was more kind of gaming, it was social media, it was e-commerce. It's not the dream of tech. Now you're seeing AI, you're seeing quantum, you're seeing some really deep tech coming through. And I think that's really a positive thing for Europe, because we do have fantastic universities and institutions. Some of the leaders in all types of technology and science are based here. That's a strategic advantage for us. And as the governments become more conscious of that and building funding around those institutions, I think it's a huge opportunity for us, not just Cambridge and Oxford, but across Europe. We're seeing incredible AI companies come up, for instance, in Spain, where you wouldn't have thought that. And these are congregations of different types of people from different countries using Spain as a base and building fantastic companies. You know, the culture around work in Europe probably has to adapt a little bit. You know, they have to work hard. They have to be in the office, they have to be working 7 days a week. So that is coming in Europe. You know, it's improving compared to the US. But, you know, with this government money coming into the ecosystem, we all know the wonderful job that European Investment Fund has done, but has always been a little bit more of a silent investor into funds, letting funds do their thing. But as these governments get more involved, one of the huge benefits is for our portfolio companies, the connections we have with governments is really, really powerful, because we can start bringing our portfolio companies to governments, maybe think about how is that government going to build its own AI infrastructure. Maybe our portfolio company can be a customer to the government. And that becomes a really powerful thing for Europe to start accessing, if it can support its own technology companies through, you know, contracts, through government help, connections across the world. That's a real interesting thing. So as all of this political goodwill and pushing and shoving starts to come to a strategy, I think that's a huge opportunity for Europe.
I think people often don't fully appreciate how much the private markets and VC and startups and the tech industry has been supported by the US government. I think Europe gets a bad rep where it's kind of put down often by the amount of government money that goes in, but there's a huge amount of government money that goes in from the US effectively into private markets and into supporting the tech industry. I think it's worth I say that quite a lot. So if I'm repeating myself, I apologize if that's boring, but I think it's just really important to see that this isn't a European thing, government money. This is a global thing.
Yeah.
Now, well, let's move into quantum. So I think we're going to talk a little bit about fusion later. So AI, quantum, and fusion, I think, are really exciting. And there are some movements across all three. Now, on the quantum side, there was news this week from Microsoft. After 20 years of research, it's hailed as a new paradigm in quantum. And we're going to get into each of our cynicism about this in a second. But the Majorana 1 chip, which is the world's first quantum processor, powered by a topological core architecture, meaning that quantum is more reliable and scalable. The qubits are. So Satya is saying that this new state of matter is pivotal for achieving more stable qubits. It's become a bit of a PR sesh from Microsoft this week. Mads, do you want to kick off on the quantum tip?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I mean, look, you have all the usual naysayers, and it's easy to be skeptical, of course. Does it work? Is it a genuine breakthrough, or is it just another Theranos? There's always plenty of that. But for a moment, let's just assume that this does work. And maybe the context around why quantum is useful. There's a lot of stuff you can do with quantum computing that you can't do with traditional computing. Around encryption, which we all know can be used to potentially crack the RSA algorithm, which means we're going to have to think about different ways to encrypt things. But also in things like finance, you can optimize portfolios because you can simulate trillions of options in parallel. You can use it to optimize supply chains. You can use it in AI because quantum linear algebra. So basically. Traditional, the AI models we build today, kind of the model that we're all super excited about right now, we can call that traditional AI, is basically built on linear algebra. That's how we make these big neural nets. But quantum linear algebra, which is what we can do when we have quantum computing, will enable us to train vastly bigger models in a fraction of the time. So it's sort of, a whole new scope of what we can do with AI models. So there's so many cool applications of this once we get it to work. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the timescales in a minute. Now, the challenge is that the quantum states, these new bits, these qubits, right? They're not like traditional bits that are just 0 or 1. They have these qubits that can be 0 or 1, or they can have these superpositions where they can be everything in between. And that means that they're very finicky. And that means that even if you can create a qubit, it might not reliably tell you what you want to know. It might not be a reliable store of information. And so today, for every time you have a qubit, you need another 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 qubits to error correct that one qubit. So when you hear we've created a 1,000 qubit computer, that's really maybe only one logical error corrected qubit. So we need hundreds or thousands of error-corrected qubits to do meaningful computations. And so what's special around this Majorana 1 is that it's a completely new approach to designing the qubits. So you have this built-in error correction because it's topological, meaning that it's created in a way where rather than having kind of one part of the system contain all the information, you have two different particles, and then you look at the relationship between them, and that's more reliable from a physics-based perspective. And therefore, instead of needing thousands of qubits for error correction, you may only need 10 or 20 or 30. Right? So that means you're bringing the scale of where we get to meaningful quantum computing much, much closer, potentially, if it works. And so that's what's making it so exciting. When are we going to get this to a commercially useful state? Commercially useful quantum computers will have, at least 100 logical qubits, and that could arrive already by the end of this decade. So kind of 27 at the near end to 2030 at the far end. Cryptography breaking quantum computers are probably still 10 years away. And if we're looking at some of the scales of what we need for scientific breakthroughs in material sciences and pharma, we're probably still around 15 years away. So it's still a little bit further out into the future, but the potential of what we'll be able to do here is so vast that it's very exciting.
What Ben, do you do quantum now?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have a brilliant young man on my team who's a PhD in quantum computing from Cambridge. So he feeds me the sound bites that I use for my to pay fundraising chats, basically.
That's great.
So I'm learning slowly from him. But it is, we have an investment in a company from Australia, Q Control, that does software for quantum computers. And to Mad's point, it's not that far in the future. There are applications around quantum in our everyday lives already. I mean, MRI uses quantum technology effectively to check the behavior of atoms around magnetic fields. One of our Q Control, that there's interesting work around quantum sensing. So this is using quantum sensors to track potentially, where you are in the world as alternatives to GPS, etc. So I think quantum has all sorts of implications also in the AI field. So we talk about tensor networks, which is another very, a very complex mathematical theorem, but those tensor networks are now being used in AI to around language models. So, I think it's a fantastically exciting time. We will invest in this space. Again, it comes down to expectation versus reality. And, in terms of the fund length, if you have a 10-year fund, you just have to be careful of timing it so the companies that you're investing in are going to have the impact within the life cycle of your fund.
And what do you think about the Microsoft press release?
Well, I'm reliably informed that if you dig into the press release, some of the reviewers or the referees within Nature magazine were a little bit skeptical. I don't think that the theory is problematic in any way, but there is this element where, the big companies, if they're missing a bit of PR for that week, perhaps they can throw out something extremely technical and, keep everyone happy that they got lots of likes online, et cetera, a little bit, like the big announcements around AI. I sometimes just feel that these who's checking in 4, 5, 6 years time what they said in an article or a big announcement a few years ago really came true. I think sometimes the value of these things is in the announcement to make, a politician look super good or a company look really clever. Where's the evidence? No one's going back to check these things. So, maybe that's me being a little bit harsh. I think it's fantastic and people should push the barriers. So, yeah.
We are. It's great. I think you made this point earlier, Ben. Europe is great. We have the R&D, we have the technicians, we have the engineers. So AI, quantum, fusion, all of these technologies that we're talking about are happening in Europe, which I think is something that we must always shout to the rooftops about. Now, staying with AI, Grok 3 is out. So ultra fast development, trained on Colossus, 100,000 GPUs. It only took 3 months to train, which is much faster than GPT-4 and Sonnet 3.5. But what does this all mean, Mads? What's the output of all this speed?
We sort of talked about it a week or two ago, talking about that it was just about to drop, and it's a super impressive model. It's very, very fast. It's quickly hit the top of the benchmarks, top of the chatbot arena. All the benchmarks are super impressive. The development speed has been very impressive. And it's interesting to see how this rivalry between Elon Musk and Sam Altman, kind of, X versus OpenAI, that's leading to this hyper-competitive atmosphere. As a working tool, I'd say the news analysis is really hard to beat because it's sifting basically straight from the X feed or the Twitter feed. When it comes to doing work, kind of the file and the project work, it's not quite there yet. It's not bad, but some of the other models like Anthropic's Claude and OpenAI's ChatGPT are still better. And I'm a huge proponent of Anthropic. I think that's a wonderful company. I can't wait to see what comes out of that shop next, and it's not going to be far now. On the OpenAI side, we know that ChatGPT or GPT 4.5 could be out as early as next week, and GPT-5 may be released as early as May. So the Grok 3 is a great contribution in record time. And a friend of mine said the other day that it's freaking annoying with Elon Musk, knowing that he is as distracted as he is by all the shenanigans he is running around and spends time on, that his companies are still executing so well. And that he's been able to build these organizations.
He's not pouring the holes. He's not writing the code. He's not shooting rockets. He's got teams of incredibly impressive people doing this stuff. It's not like he's the only one in the firm that can do these things.
Exactly. But who's built these teams? Who's attracted this talent? Right? Yeah. And this is the thing that's a bit annoying because you kind of look at, I admire him for his business prowess. I think some of the stuff he says politically is sometimes completely misguided, and you want there to be some justice and balance, but anyway, that's a conversation for another day. That's on Grok 3. while we're at it, quick shout out to Evo 2 that was also out this week. So Evo 2 is a massive biological foundation model. It's got 40 billion parameters, so it's smaller than the big LLMs like a GPT 3.5 or GPT 4. It's been trained on data sourced from over 128,000 genomes across all domains of life. So plants, animals, bacteria, and more. And it's a foundational model that gives us predictive powers on DNA. So we can think a little bit about it like a biological GPT or biological chat GPT. It can help answer questions like how a mutation affects a gene's function, and therefore it's useful in things like cancer research. So it's just, I think it's so fascinating. It's just been released.
Where's the Evo 2 from?
So it's an open source piece of work that's come out of collaboration between the Art Institute, Stanford, and NVIDIA. It's been released completely as open source, nice. Which is so exciting. So it's just come out. We need to see more to understand how good and how strong it really is in production. But it's just, what a wonderful thing that these organizations have gifted the world. I think we talk about how AI is going to bring us closer to solving, curing cancer and doing some of these things. It's exactly these types of, technological milestones that bring us closer to that, to those types of breakthroughs.
Yeah, I mean we're super future focused today. I mean the latest AI, the quantum, the fusion. This all feels like the kind of dialogue that is, oh yeah, that's 10 years away. That's 10 years away. It feels like there has been some steps forwards. I mean, we're going to talk about fusion next. Now, France is continuing to nail their tech PR. They're so bloody good at it. Macron is like really nailed this whole tech. The French tech PR engine is back in. We're talking star stuff. We're talking unlimited energy from fusion. The CEA's West Tokamak reactor has produced 22 minutes of continuous fusion. That's what goes on inside the sun. It's a new record, I think. China was 17 minutes. Mads, you'll have to correct me there. There's lots to unpack between, like, AI is going to be very energy intensive. Can fusion come online soon enough to create some of our energy requirements? This is very exciting. It's a new record, but Mads, tell us a little bit what's happening on the fusion side.
Yeah, it feels like in all the doom and gloom, it actually feels like some of all these things, as you're saying, are coming together. Fusion energy is important because a single gram of hydrogen isotopes, they can yield the equivalent of 11 tons of coal. And so it's the dream of unlimited clean energy that we potentially have in our hands here. Now, fusion has been super elusive. For decades, it was said that the only really reliable piece of R&D or kind of result that's come out of all the R&D has been this number 40, which is that it was said that fusion was always 40 years away. Kind of that was sort of the iron rule of fusion research. Now, the difficulty is not in fusing two hydrogen atoms. The difficulty is in making the process sufficiently stable that you can reach these temperatures you need, so kind of 100 to 150 million Celsius, and then keeping this high energy plasma continuously stable without damaging the reactor. It kind of works in the sun, it's pretty far away, but how do we do that on Earth? And so in January, a team of Chinese researchers, they managed, as you say, to get to 17 minutes of continuous output. But this week, a French team managed to get to 22 minutes just a month later. So boom, take that for European tech. What a wonderful thing. Now, the question, of course, is what will it take to go commercial? We're not there yet. There are a couple of things you need to do. You need to achieve continuous net energy gain. So you need to, it takes a lot of energy to kind of put the magnets in place that hold this burning plasma kind of there, so it doesn't burn a great big hole in the reactor. And you need, of course, you need to get more energy out of the reactor than you put in. Otherwise, it's just a bit pointless. So we need to get to continuous net energy gain for an extended period of time. And so the kind of scaling this continuous operation from minutes to days, weeks, months, years. And we need to develop the materials that are durable enough to withstand the temperatures. And so we also need to address some of the fuel cycle challenges and make sure we have enough deuterium and tritium to be able to run the reactors. So the timelines are short term. In the next kind of 5 years, we're expecting to do continuous experimental milestones to refine the reactor design. and bring some of these gain cycles from 22 minutes and up and get it further up. Medium term, it's probably next decade, building and testing demo reactors, and then seeing the sustained energy gain there. And then longer term, and we're talking probably 2040s onwards, commercial rollout. And so, look, it's easy again to be cynical, 15, 20 years away. But if we think about it, for a second, what if we only have 15 to 20 years until we're at a place where we have limitless clean energy? Wouldn't that be a pretty remarkable thing?
Yeah.
So just think it's worth kind of
away.
Stopping and reflecting on some of these milestones here.
No, I totally agree. And also, if this kind of 40-year milestone has been halved or more, I mean, I think let's hope that's right. I love that it's all happening in Europe, as you say. It feels like there have been some real inroads. I mean, 22 minutes doesn't sound long, but I think in fusion terms, that is pretty bloody long. So let's keep on going, Europe. Now, Ben, you obviously invest in AI and quantum. What are you doing in energy? Are you doing fusion? Are you doing nuclear? Are you looking at other energy plays?
Not really. I think we're interested in AI companies. We're looking at an AI company that works in compression right now. So compressing language models up to 80 to 90%, allowing them to be more efficient. So coming at it possibly from the other angle, which is using less energy in the process. But I wouldn't say we're investors specifically in that sector. So my kind of knowledge probably ends at Chernobyl being my favorite TV show.
Yeah, not a great outcome there.
No,
but I think
but that wasn't Europe. Let's not call that Europe.
I want to quickly talk about some data that Peter Walker from Carter released this week, and I think anecdotally we all felt this. But he goes into, he was looking at round sizes for startups over the last 5 years. And he's come up with these two competing theories around VC-backed startups, which I think is really interesting. And I'm going to throw in some new VC buzzword bingo, see if you can pick it up. And these theories feel to me a bit Jevons paradoxy. So theory one, here we go. AI is making everything about building a company cheaper. Yeah. Startups need less cash than ever before, and this is likely to continue. So this is very much leaning into Sam Altman's solo unicorn founder theory, which I think is a really interesting thought experiment. Theory two. So AI is lowering the barrier, thereby increasing competition, therefore making the cash advantage actually more important as startups scale. I.e., you can start for less, but ultimately winning a category is going to cost you more than ever. So what does the data say? So he took a snapshot of median round sizes over the last 5 years. Across most stages, rounds are smaller than they were 5 years ago, adjusted for inflation. The major outliers being the very, very early stages of pre and seed. Therefore, is seed the new A? Could it be that companies are raising larger seed rounds in the explicit attempt to not need another fundraise? And somebody then coined the term venture light or seed strapping, or to be a seed strap startup. Are larger funds now playing at seed where their fund economics demand companies raise significant amounts of cash, or the numbers no longer make sense? So Mads, we've always had a sense of this, especially as with us pre-seed and seed. Where do you want to take this topic?
I think it's interesting to see how some of the data plays out, and also some of the anecdotes. And there's so much speculation. I saw one of the founders, I think it was from Gamma, interviewed recently, and Gamma, that's a wonderful, just beautiful product and a beautiful tool they've built. And kind of the headline of the story, I think, was in the New York Times, was that exactly as you're saying here, with AI, we can build companies much more efficiently, and we can scale revenue, and therefore we don't need to raise so much money or build so big teams. And the takeaway from the story was, yes, that's kind of what they've done, but they're on their way out to raise more money so they can build bigger teams. And I think at the end of the day, the laws of economics will always apply. If you've got two teams that are equally good with the same type of technology, and one has got more resource and more money, they can acquire more customers, and they're going to win the market at the end of the day. And so I think at the end of the day, there will always be a market for capital and investment, because it's not just building the product, it's also making the product better, it's also distribution, it's also all the other things that go around creating a big successful company. And if you have more resource, you've got better chances of doing that. The caveat is when you're very early and you're still figuring out how to get to product market fit, too much resource can distract you. You don't want to become too bloated or get too big too soon. You want to make sure you're very judicious around how you raise and how you spend, kind of always, but certainly very, very early on. But then I think once you're a product market fit, more money is going to put you in a better position. And we've seen this in the LLM space, right? All the big frontier model companies are raising a lot of money because being first to market and having the resource and being able to hire the best people still matters. So I think to some extent, I love Peter Walker's analysis. I think it's really good. He's always has got great data and great analysis of it. And I think his takeaway was along the lines of, look, there's just still a lot that's happening here. Watch this space. It's still a little bit murky. We don't know exactly what's going to happen.
Ben, you're later than us. You're from the growth perspective. But have you got any thoughts on these two theories?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting. I think, again, though, there is a different type of company that we're looking at these days compared to 5-7 years ago. I think SaaS companies were very much in the limelight back then, and a good SaaS company would develop its product over time. It would improve its product over time, and you would see that its revenue would grow more steadily as the product improved and it get out there and sold its product. It was a gradual impact on revenue. Now, if we're looking at deep tech companies, a lot of the work happens very early on, perhaps even before the company goes to the customer, if they're creating a piece of technology. So for us as a growth investor, waiting till a company like that gets to 10, 20 million in revenue, it may be too late because they become too visible. Once you have an amazing piece of technology that is being monetized, everybody's on it. So for
Does that mean
sure,
you'll come downstream?
I think we will have
shift
to.
Your... All right, okay.
Yeah, we have to take a view of the value of the technology and have some way of equating that to what we used to call revenue at a certain point and say there's so much inherent value there, we can come in perhaps as a growth investor. We really need to see some revenue. So we're not coming into the seed stage. And a lot of these technology companies or deep tech companies will have maybe had some kind of product in the market before, and now they've created a new product that they're raising for. And so sometimes you can use that previous revenue as a justification that this is an ongoing company that can make money. So that helps. But I think on the other point to this is that the revaluation, of course, in 2022 that we talked about earlier, did change some of the aspects of the way these companies grow. There was the growth at all costs mantra out there in the past, which was, burn cash, get users, and think about profitability in the future. I think investors are much more focused now on, can you reach profitability very quickly? Is it in your own hands? And I wonder maybe whether that has changed the round size that we're looking at, and that perhaps founders are a little bit more pragmatic about proving profitability before.
I think my sense is we're moving slightly out of that black swan memo, get to profitability, stretch your timelines. I have no data to back this up, but my sense is that we're now moving, but not to the crazy ZERP, grow at all costs, crush the world, cash be damned. But I think there is an argument for some startups to start putting their foot back down on the gas and kind of get into from growth and put it all into kind of the marketing and the sales column again. But we'll see. Awesome. So I want to highlight a quick deal of the week before we close off this pod. So I was looking at Carmen Plus this week, which is a Dutch-US startup that builds autonomous spacecraft that can travel to asteroids and then mine them for materials. They've raised $20 million and they're looking to do their first launch in 2027, which is only around the corner. Now, the reason it caught my eye was because when Elon was starting SpaceX and Starlink, and I thought, oh, this was whatever, 5-10 years ago. I thought, oh, this is mining rights. So my assumption was all of this push into space was we're running out of stuff on Earth, guys and girls. We need to go and get some more stuff from somewhere. It's on asteroids. It's on other planets. So my assumption, it was all, that push from him was all mining rights. And so seeing Carbon Plus just reminded me of that conversation in my head. Now, I don't know if anyone has any perspectives on this, but maybe Ben, do you have any thoughts on an asteroid mining startup? I guess, would you invest?
I think we would look at it for sure. It does sound a long way down the line, gosh. I think when we do invest in space, and we've got some fantastic space companies in our portfolio, they're much more in the current space economy where there's revenues coming in and there's natural use cases. I think it sounds wonderful. I think it sounds like the plot to a Hollywood movie. Perhaps there might have even been a couple of 90s Hollywood movies, but I think Bruce Willis is unavailable.
Yeah, I was going to say, where was Bruce Willis? It was with who was Steve Tyler's? It was Liv Tyler, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yes,
I'm up for that. I'm up for whatever it was called, version 2, starring Elon Musk and actually, if he goes to Mars, that's
and
fine.
Dan Bowyer.
Yeah, I'm in. I'll polish off my acting chops. Mads, yeah, would you invest? Would we invest in a space asteroid mining company? Maybe we'd look at it.
Yeah, I think yes and no, and I think it sort of goes to the heart of a challenge. It's something I think we need to think about as an industry, because I think historically some of this stuff is stuff that would have been funded by government research labs, right? NASA's been putting lots of money into, taking mankind to boldly go where no one has gone before and all that stuff for decades, and that's wonderful. I think there's so much more you can do in a commercial setting, because we just know once there is a profit kind of incentive, everybody becomes more focused on efficiency, and it's just a better way to build and do. At the same time, if you look at the type of capital that's required very early on, to Ben's point, Ben, he's a growth type investor, and they really need to see some revenue. And guess what? When you're building satellites to go mine asteroids, there probably ain't going to be much revenue the first few years. And we sit at our end, and for us to write a check into a round like this, well, the check's as big as, half our fund, right? So, and this is the seed check. So what is the type of fund we need that can fund these types of probably worthwhile endeavors that could yield great and profitable returns at some point in the future, where the fund is big enough but can invest early enough, and can you make all the fund economics work? And I think we've seen some of it in the States, where Andreessen have had their American dynamism and have been pushing sort of that notion. I don't know if we quite have that type of investment firm in Europe yet.
Should we have one?
Absolutely. I think it's exactly what we should have. And I think one is not enough. I think we need to build a whole industry of venture investors. It won't be seed investing like what we know today, right? It's not $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million to write some software and get to market within a couple of months, and then boom, off you go. It's much longer horizons. There's much more risk. The payoffs could be incredible. You look at what Elon Musk has done with SpaceX. Wow, right? That took a lot of capital up front, but has built an incredible business. And the seed investors in that company have done very well. Wouldn't it be great if we could build another 5 or 10 SpaceX type companies in Europe?
We've got the Cornish spaceport. We've got our UK spaceport down in Cornwall. We've got our broken 747 that was supposed to lob satellites off that kind of arc takeoff to lob satellites into space. And we can rev that up, I'm sure.
I'd like to think we can get beyond Monty Python at some point, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I think on this point, it is still governments that decide the winners in this space. It's still the government money which chooses.
Yeah, well, they had a huge hand in
because they're the first lost piece. Really, they're the ones taking the risk.
I mean, they have created Elon the ability. They've given him the ability to fund a lot of the space.
That's the thing. People don't realize. I think those NASA contracts that went to SpaceX at the outset is what built SpaceX. So there's still a huge influence there from government money.
Let's completely agree. Let's take the flip side of the argument is, if you're the U.S. government and you're looking back over the last couple of years and you say, okay, we took a risk 15 years ago. We backed SpaceX. We procured some launches, some launch capacity. Today, that means we have, instead of having a monopoly with Boeing, we have another vendor. And when the astronauts were stranded on the ISS recently and Boeing couldn't fly them back, Well, SpaceX could. And so I just think it's so important that you create that competitive competitive dynamic. I think kind of saying that the government gave it to him, I don't. It's not fair. I mean, like, you could like or dislike the man's politics, but nobody can argue that what SpaceX has accomplished is incredible. The fact that you have incumbents that like a Boeing that have not only not been able to do the same, but have performed, cannot even create a reusable launch vehicle, let alone a shuttle to ferry these 4 astronauts back. I think just goes to show how difficult the endeavor is.
Listen, they gave it a good go. They nearly got there, and I think Boeing have super screwed the pooch. I mean, they're in such the doghouse at the moment. I wonder how that one's
absolutely. So, I just want more. I want us to back more great founders to go and do great things. I think that's how we create successful societies.
Do it. Let's do it. Ben, what's happening for you this week? What's on your agenda this week?
I'm actually heading to Doha for Web Summit. A couple of days down there. Lots of great companies. Obviously, lots of potential investors from that region as well. Having said that, it's not easy for funds to raise in the Middle East as well. The Middle East is very inwardly focused right now and building their own ecosystems. But really looking forward to that. So that'll be the main thing for me.
And Mads, you're off traveling as well, aren't you?
That's right. I'll be in the Far East. I'm talking at a conference there on AI and how kind of AI is transforming and continues to transform the investing landscape.
Well, it's great because as soon as you go away, we sign more term sheets, so that's fine.
I just have to stay away. That's it.
Just go away and we'll be absolutely fine. Gents, what a gift. What a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. Catch you next time.
See you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.
This was their finest hour.
Tear down this wall.
It's more than just an alliance. This is a union of values.
Let's start acting.